I'm the co-founder and director of engineering for Kaizen Dynamic Product Development. I'm Irish, as you might know, and I live in China. I've been in China for the last 15 years, doing product design, development, manufacturing, worked with a number of companies from Apple, Dell, Nike, Olympus, to a lot of different startups. It's been a lot of fun. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of pitfalls out there, and we'll discuss a lot of those today. But there's a lot of good advice available in the network here, so very happy to be a part of it.
Hi, I'm Chrissy Meyer. I'm a partner at Root Ventures. So we are a seed stage hard tech VC firm. So basically what that means is that we invest in startups at the earliest stages, oftentimes when it's just a few founders and an idea. And we invest in hard tech. So hard tech includes hardware. Hardware is hard, but it also includes a lot of other things too. So we invest in enterprise software, machine learning, AI, developer tools. We've invested in everything from hamburger making robots to sustainable seafood, companies growing salmon from stem cells. My background is all in electrical engineering. Before I joined Fruit, I spent a decade building and shipping products at huge companies like Apple, where I learned to scale to tens of millions of devices per year, and also very early stage startups and a little bit of everything in between.
Hey guys, my name is Dana Madlam. I'm Vice President of Services at Rush Order, which means I look after most of our day-to-day operations. We're considered a third-party logistics provider or order fulfillment house, or essentially the guys who ship your stuff after these guys are done funding it and making it. We've been in business for 30 years, behind the scenes of everybody's best idea. This is sort of our running joke internally. Some of those turn out to be wonderful. If you ever owned a Palm Pilot, a flip video camcorder, a Roku unit in the early days, we're the guys behind those startups that became the big deals, and then also behind a lot of the products you never heard about, and for good reason. So hopefully we can help you avoid some of those last mile mistakes in the process.
Awesome, thanks so much. All right, the first question is going to revolve around all the different hats you guys have to wear. And I find it really commendable though, how much you guys are taking on, all of you. Out of all the startups that I've met, there isn't one where one of the employees or partners isn't having to do something that's totally outside their skill set and totally outside their comfort zone. But I want to hear from you guys, what things should not be winged? What should we not think, well, this seems standardized. This seems like I should be able to figure it out pretty quickly. What things that if you just wing it and you don't really know what you're doing, you could cause catastrophic failure with? Dana, I was going to start with you with that one, and then Sarah, if you want to follow up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when it comes to shipping product, think it's a fairly commoditized process or thing to do. Although I kind of equate it to like having kids. You know, I'm a father of 2 daughters, right? Like billions of people before me have had kids, and so therefore it should be easy, and it's not at all. And the same is true of everything that happens after the product is made. So product comes from this contract manufacturer, let's say in China or domestically, doesn't matter. What happens next has been done by thousands and thousands, if not millions, of companies before you. And so therefore the assumption is that this might be easy, I can wing it, everybody else has done it, I'm going to go focus on this other aspect of my business that nobody has done before. And admittedly, like, that's probably why you're starting the startup, right? Is because you're doing something new and unique. But unfortunately, the things that seem obvious tend to be the ones that bite sometimes the hardest, where missing something that seems commoditized or simple can result in maybe extra dollars per unit in shipping cost. And it could have been easily avoidable, it could have been obvious, but at the end of the day, it kills your margins entirely, right? And so I think not overlooking what feels commoditized is really important.
So Dara, same question, but maybe the founders are software engineers by trade and they're getting into hardware development.
Well, first off, I think as a startup, you have to wing it at the start. You have to use your skills and your passion and your whatever it is that made you start that company. You have to use that to get traction. And then you get to a point where you need need to talk to people who are experts in that field, and you need to wing it based on something. You can't just make up how long it's going to take you to get to market, how long it takes you to open a tool, to qualify it, to pass UL testing. These things are based on facts, and you can't really wing it. But if you talk to informed people, you can still pull it off. But then, as you push further into the process, you need to have the right people in place. So like, a software engineer may have great knowledge in the firmware and the app side of things, but they're not going to know the implications of the draft angle on a tool. They're not going to know how to certify a product. They're not going to know about the RF that needs to go, that needs to be tested to pass certain standards. And these things you just can't wing. I think the same thing comes towards the end of the process when you're working, well, it should be at the start of your process, but when you're more focused on your cost. If you have never done it before, you're not going to understand the built-in margins of a factory, labor costs, packaging costs, scrap costs, yield costs. These are things you just can't wing. You need your expert in-house figuring this stuff out for you. And if you wing that and you're telling everyone your BOM cost is $15 but you don't know where it's coming from, it's just not going to pan out.
Yeah, and just to add to that really quickly, I think when you're in the hardware world, there are just some things you just don't try to do yourself. I think on the electrical side, like, if you have a product that has radios and wireless performance matters, like, do not design your own antenna. Like, find someone who has done it and done it again and again and really knows what they're doing. And like, I'm an electrical engineer, and I was in school for many, many years taking RF classes, and like, I would not attempt to design my own antenna. Like, just stay away from that.
Antenna design is wizardry.
It's black magic, like 100% black magic. And I feel like on the mechanical side, it's like tooling design. Like, it's okay to design your own parts, but like, come on, like, if you're talking about like cavity and core and slides and mold flow analysis, like, don't try to do that yourself. Like, lean on third-party consultants, lean on your suppliers, like, don't try to wing it. And also, just on the operations side, like, anything related to regulatory and certification, because if you get that wrong, if you submit your documentation to FCC and there's a typo, like, if that doesn't get through the process, then you could be talking about shipping months later when everything else is ready to go. And so those are the sort of things that are really frustrating when you hit that. So I always advise the startups that are in Root's portfolio and just startups that I'm advising in general, like, find someone, find a third-party testing house, find an external consultant, find somebody to like guide you through the regulatory and certification process.
Wait, you can keep that mic, because this next one is going to start off with you, but Dan and Dara, if you have something to add, please chime in. So along the same kind of lines, I have observed, and maybe you would contradict me, and that's fine, go ahead. But from all my travels, I found that the startups in San Francisco, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, you have a culture that's really weird compared to the rest of the world, and that's that you often have a tendency to treat hardware development like software development. And I've even seen some vice presidents of engineering who are pushing forward basically a hardware product with supplementary software, and they have a software background and no hardware background whatsoever, and this is mind-blowing to me. So, again, contradict me if you don't agree with this sentiment, but how have you seen this first? And then how is bringing hardware to life different than software development in general?
Yeah, 100%. I see this over and over again. I can't count the number of companies that I have that come in pitching me saying we're going to make hardware development move at the speed of software development. And I cringe anytime anyone tells me that. It's like, there are very good reasons why hardware should not move at the speed of software. Like, once you cut a tool, like, I'm sorry, like, there's no going back. Like, it's gonna be very expensive to make major design changes at that point. And once you ship a product out into the field, your OTA software updates can only get you so far. Like, it's impossible to call all those units back and repair a PCB. So there's a reason why hardware is methodical. And I know, there's the Facebook mantra of like move fast and break things, and it's just super obvious that Zuckerberg is not a hardware guy. But then there's the hardware version of that, and you guys have probably heard this, of like, move slow and make things. And I hate that phrase too, because I would never, like as a VC, I would never tell one of our companies to move slow. Like, that's not good advice. But I think that the reality of the situation is that you have to balance. You have to find a balance of moving fast enough. Like if you're shipping product and you don't feel uncomfortable about shipping, like you probably waited too long to ship. So you should feel uncomfortable about shipping. But at the same time, you shouldn't push a product out into the field that is going to have like major catastrophic field failures. Because oftentimes when hardware companies move fast, the first thing that they drop is testing and validation. And when you drop testing and validation, there's a serious risk that you're going to ship with like major field failures. So it's a balance, and it's an art, and I wish there was like an obvious answer, but I guess my general advice is like move through the phases, like do the EVT, DVT, PVT. Don't rush it, don't skip phases. Make sure that you're meeting all of your requirements before you advance to the next phase, and be methodical about it.
And how do VCs see hardware versus software?
Yeah, a lot of VCs won't touch hardware. I think Root Ventures is one of the handful of VCs in the Valley that actually embrace hardware, and it's because VCs don't always understand the time requirements and also the capital requirements, that there's NRE, that there's tooling, that there's inventory costs, and from our perspective, we see it as high risk, high reward. Like we know how to analyze the risks, so we embrace it, but not a lot of VCs in the Valley do.
Either of you gentlemen have something to add to that? That was great.
Yeah, hardware typically takes a long time, but we're going to do things differently. Famous last words, and we hear it all the time. There's a reason why hardware takes a long time. There's lots of new methods for 3D printing and prototyping and all of these things that are fantastic for proof of concept, fantastic to get you to the first point quickly. But when it comes to production, you still need to open your hard tool, you still need to do your product development, you still need to plan for your testing, you need to plan for assembly, plan for materials, plan for cost of BOM. And you only open your tool when you know that what you have is the best product you're going to get. And there's always compromises. You can have the most beautiful industrial design in the world, and it may not be manufacturable. There's always draft angles, there's always material restrictions, there's always process restrictions, there's cost restrictions, and all of these things are decisions that once you make them, there's no going back. So decisions take longer to make because you don't get to reverse, and there's a lot more decisions, and every decision has an investment with it. Once you open your tooling, thousands of dollars. Once you pull the trigger on fabricating PCBAs at a factory, you're probably building 1,000 or more units. That's thousands of dollars. Once you put something into a lab to certify and you suddenly want to change something, that's thousands of dollars again. So it's slower. Like Chrissy said, it's more methodical. You have to follow a process. You have to take risks, but they have to be calculated risks.
Just one last comment on that. Talking about like over-the-air updates and the thought of moving really, really fast. I think the good news is there are things you can do to mitigate. I think building a flexible supply chain is important, not just before the contract manufacturer and bringing components in, but after the product leaves the production facility. You know, over-the-air updates in the field can save you, but can also be burdensome and can be problematic and sometimes impossible. So thinking about where are the opportunities in between, if the product is landed at a 3PL, third-party logistics warehouse like ours, you know, the unfortunate truth is like I'm the only one up here without a technical background, and I promise you, I would bet a lot of money on this, that myself and my employees have more experience flashing firmware than anybody up here. I don't know anything about how it was written. I just know the PCs were handed to us. We did, you know, or the smartphones, wherever it was. But having that last little bit of agility and flexibility somewhere in the middle, if you think about some of those opportunities, can be big savers.
Awesome, thanks. So you can keep that mug again because this one's for you. Later on, we have a great fireside chat coming up, and it's all going to be focused on trade stuff going on. But Dana, I know you have some gems for us from your perspective, where, now these aren't your personal recommendations, but maybe things that you've seen clients do to get around some of the new restrictions popping up.
The Trump tariffs. Yeah, I think duties and taxes, and nowadays the tariffs are a big deal. Sometimes they go overlooked. I think recently not so much because it's headline news. I know nothing about policy. I have no way of predicting what's going to happen this year, next year, forevermore with duties, taxes, and tariffs, and especially inbound to the U.S. as well as other countries. But thinking about those things in advance, and again, what it means for your supply chain, there are, again, creative things you can do. We do a lot of fulfillment directly out of Hong Kong, as opposed to bringing product into the U.S. In bulk. U.S. consumers, maybe not that well accustomed to receiving their shipments, maybe it's an e-commerce shipment, for example, directly to their doorstep. Not that well accustomed to receiving shipments from overseas. They expect things to come domestically, but there are ways to ship, let's say, from a place like Hong Kong and more or less emulate the same customer experience. Maybe it's slightly slower, maybe it's slightly more expensive, but compared to a 20% tariff on your cost of goods sold, that may be really worthwhile. I just got back from Mexico late last night. It's not where I got my black eye, by the way. It's a long story. You can see this. But we're looking at warehousing in places like Mexico and Canada, which we do have now set up, where we're doing some creative things again to get around some of the tariffs. There are limits. Some of these things are really good fit for certain brands, certain manufacturers, certain hardware makers. Some are not so good of a fit, and sometimes you're just plain out of luck, and there's really no way around it. But definitely worth exploring and having those conversations with anybody you can.
Great, thank you. Okay, so my next question has to do with another thing that I've seen personally that's kind of a peeve for me. So I do optical engineering, and we do optical virtual prototyping, and you can do virtual prototyping in lots of different parts of hardware design. You can do that for mechanical fit, you can do that for thermal simulations and electrical engineering. But I see that very often just completely missed. So that's where I see opportunities missed for more efficient development in terms of either cost or time savings. What are some things that you've seen? Chrissy, I think this might be story time.
Yeah, the thing that I see hardware startups miss a lot is that you put off reliability testing until late in the product development cycle. And I understand that in the early stages you're very much in design and you're moving as fast as you can, but I've worked on projects before where we did not front load reliability testing, and we did a decent amount of reliability testing up front, but we were on the back end of the schedule. We had a lot of inventory built up. We were already shipping product out of China to our 3PLs in the US, and just as like a quick sanity check, we threw some devices into like a heat soak chamber, and we changed our methodology a little bit. We wanted to do a slightly more aggressive test, so we did it with the units powered on and fully functioning while they were in the heat soak chamber, and 80% of them failed. And I mean, like, failed in like a catastrophic, like, cannot use the unit at all kind of way. And it was a very realistic test, because you can imagine like hot cars, you can imagine summers in Texas. Like, it wasn't a super unrealistic scenario, and we had to put a hold on shipping. And I spent the next I think it was like 42 days in China trying to work with our suppliers to figure out the root cause and get a corrective action in place for the issue. But it ended up slipping our ship schedule significantly, and as I walk away from that experience, it's like every project I've done since then, I have taken every unit, as many units as I could get my hands on out of the very first prototype build, and put them into the most aggressive reliability tests as I possibly could, both environmental and mechanical. And it's always hard at that phase, because you've got software developers who are like clamoring to get their hands on units that they can actually develop on. And at the same time, I'm saying, no, I'm going to take them all, and I'm going to like literally beat them until they're not functional anymore. But I think that there's a tremendous value in front-loading reliability testing, and I think that that's overlooked a lot, and it ends up adding a lot of time and expense to to program schedules when people don't do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Derek?
My answer is going to be way more boring than that. To me, efficiency is in the detail. So when you start off your project, a lot of people want to get straight from their minimum viable prototype to production, and they want to skip all of the PD stuff because they have this thing in their hand that works, and that's great, and they're really happy with it. But reality is, you need your product requirements document, you need your CMF, you need your test plan, you need your rel plan, and I know this is super boring, but this is how you get through the phases, this is how you tick the boxes, and then when you're shipping your product, you're shipping something that's really qualified. So efficiency doesn't come by taking shortcuts or taking risks along the way. Efficiency comes by, again, using the experience of people who've done it before, following that path forward, and just being as sensible as you can along the way while moving as fast as you can in that process.
I think Dana, maybe you have a comment about that?
No, I think the only thing to add is pensions. Yeah, I think planning in advance, I always go back to flexibility and agility, number one. So, like we always say, about 80% of our clients have, at some point or another, have had us pull every product off the shelf and manipulate that product in some way. Firmware is definitely the biggest culprit, but it can be sensors, components, packaging issues, little things. And so again, that's designing for flexibility and agility in the supply chain. But yeah, the other one is just, I think, starting with the customer in mind and working backwards and saying, who are we going to sell this to? What do those sales channels look like? If it's something that's going to ship, in the mail or via UPS, via small parcel, we've seen clients design packaging, for example, which is something simple. It's not really that technical, but you could be an inch off or an inch too large and across all three dimensions of a box, and it costs you an extra $2 per order. Like, well, $2 per order is a big deal on a $100 product, right? And so again, starting from the very, say, the end of the chain, which is really the customer, which I think is where most businesses should start, and thinking about their planning and working backwards, it extends all the way back to product design and the factory as well.
Awesome, thank you. Let's talk more about money. Let's see, where are startups most vulnerable to be bleeding out money that maybe they wouldn't think of? Chrissy, how about you start out?
Yeah, I think people always spend more in the development phase than they expect to, like in terms of NREs and like things go wrong. But where people actually hemorrhage money is when you go to scale, because turns out inventory is expensive, really, really expensive. And I've seen hardware startups die because of the cost of carrying inventory. And it really comes down to payment terms. So there's this concept of payment terms, which is basically when you're paying your factory. So I negotiate upfront with my factory that if a product leaves, I pay them in advance, which is like TT in advance, or I pay them net 30 days after the product leaves their factory, or 90 days later, or as much as you can negotiate. I've seen startups have negative payment terms in the sense that like they had to pay a deposit for their product 90 days before it ever left the factory. And what that does is it makes it really hard to build up inventory, like really, really hard to build up inventory. You cannot grow if if you have demand is through the roof and everyone wants your product, like tough, you don't have the working capital as a startup to be able to float that. There's some creative things you can do with like venture debt, but if you don't have a lot of credit, it can be really hard to get that. So I often advise startups like on the money side, like really focus on payment terms, and when you pay for your product is oftentimes way more important than what you pay. So instead of spending weeks negotiating an extra $1 out of the cost of your bill of materials, like take all that time and energy and put it into negotiating an extra 15 days on your payment terms, because that can go a long way.
Darren, do you want to follow up to that?
Sure, yeah, I think Chrissy nailed it, that the end of the process when you're actually scaling is where you bleed money. I think on top of that, aside from the payment terms, is forecasting. If you over-forecast or aggressively forecast, even with payment terms, those bills still come due. You still need to pay those bills at some stage. The other thing is taking big risks, like pre-ordering material before you've certified and qualified. because you need to hit your Christmas launch or whatever it is. So you order all this material, you do your certification, you fail your certification, you change a component, guess what? You got to pay for that component still. But it can happen all along the way. I mean, we see it quite often that people try and cut costs on the early stage on the product development side of things, and they end up maybe going with a factory who can do the product development for a lower cost, but then that factory ends up owning their IP, and they can't move their product to another factory because they didn't design it, they no longer own it. And that can affect their cost downs, it can affect their scale, it can affect their ability to adjust their own pricing based on volume, based on demands. So there's a lot of parts all along the way that are really cost sensitive, but I think it's really when it comes to scaling and ordering material that you're most vulnerable.
Thank you. Dana, do you have something to add?
Not much. I mean, one interesting data point, we looked at this about a year ago. I think you can define the founding date of a startup any way you'd like, but if you look at generally from when a startup is incorporated, we looked at our dozens and dozens and dozens of hardware startup clients historically over the last 5 years, and from founding date to the time they actually ship revenue generating orders out the door, the average, if you remove the outliers, which is the guys that never shipped, because it turns out the problem, the average is actually 31 months. Which I think really shocks and horrifies some people, and nobody believes that they're going to be the one that's going to take 31 months, but starting with the mean and then deciding how you're going to be different, I would encourage you to do in terms of cash flow planning.
Great, thank you. So this one's for all of you. I want to know what you advise as either too soon or too late for companies to start engaging with you. I know, Chrissy, there might be some hesitation with startups to engage with VC too early because it's too premature. Would that be an issue?
Yeah, for Root Ventures in particular, I say no time is too early. Some of our most successful investments have been people that we've been talking to and building relationships with before they left their big company job. And I think that as VCs, we see a lot. We see a lot of different ideas and companies coming through the door, and we like to stay up to speed on what's happening in terms of trends in different markets and verticals. So if you come to us early, we might not write you a check right away, but at least we can be helpful in giving feedback and guiding your exploration process. So I mean, yes, there is a time that is too late to come to us. We are solidly seed investors. So if you're raising a $10 million Series A, sorry, that's too late. I'll still be helpful. I'll still give free advice, but we're not going to be able to invest. But in terms of on the early side, there's no such thing as too early.
Dana, is there a point where you just don't want to see them? They might not get to you?
Yeah, it's funny. About half the time our new clients are startups that are hiring a 3PL for the very, very first time, and about half of our clients were their second or third 3PL in the door, maybe because the first hire wasn't the right fit, or just time to scale a little bit larger or in a different region or whatever. But no, I think in general, anybody who's willing to talk to you, you should talk to. If that's a service provider, if that's an investor, if that's whatever it may be, other startups, of course. And I would put ourselves in that camp. I mean, we're not here because we expect 10 people to walk away thinking oh gosh, order fulfillment, yes, give me one of those tomorrow, right? This doesn't happen that way. And so the idea is to be helpful. It's a small community, especially here in the Bay Area, and so the earlier you get out there and start networking and talking, the better. And if there's an investor, service provider, somebody else who's not interested in having that conversation at an early stage, that's probably okay. You probably just made a really easy decision that this is too early for this one, but maybe down the road.
Great. What about you, Dara? Is there a point where you just don't want them coming in your door, or where it's too late?
Yeah, nothing much to add really. Too early for us is there's never too early. We can have a conversation at any point. Of course, it's beneficial if you have some funding from Christy first. We'll be more interested then. In terms of too late, sure. I mean, if you've opened a tool and you're firefighting in a factory and you want someone to go in and save you, that's not our ball game. But early is better. Talk to people who can point you in the right direction. Even if we're not engaging, we can always give some advice.
Great, thank you. What about questions out there? Do you have any questions for these guys? Oh, we got one over here.
So as an experienced hardware engineer and project manager, I know to the core of my being that it's always faster to do it right than to do it over. Yet I hear these stories that are shocking to me, frankly, that you get to production and it doesn't meet the needs of the customer. So how does that happen? How does that pass due diligence, first of all? And what experiences do you value in teams to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, I think you're really hitting home a point that it's a pitfall that I see most when it comes to hardware startups, which is like lack of product market fit. And I think that as entrepreneurs, people tend to be overly optimistic. You have to be, right? Like you almost have to be to get a product out the door and build a company. But what that means is like people tend to rush right into development and jump into building and scaling a product without taking the time that they need to step back and say, do I have real product market fit? And it's harder in hardware. It's harder to determine product market fit than it is in the software world. I think that, yes, there is rapid prototyping now. There's 3D printing, there's laser cutting, there's things that you can do. You can, build your first version of an MVP with a Raspberry Pi. Like there's things that you can do to accelerate getting a works-like prototype into the hands of potential customers. And I think people should pull out all the stops and do as much of that as they can. But the reality is you've got to get as many people, potential customers, touching and physically using your product as you possibly can to get feedback before you start engaging with a CM, get your architecture locked down. Like you've got to be nimble and flexible and spend the time to make sure you have product market fit early. And one thing that I've heard people say that I think resonates well with me is like, if you don't know if you have product market fit after talking to a whole bunch of customers and having them use your product, you probably don't have it. If there's any doubt in your mind, it's probably not there. People should be beating your door down, and that is what it feels like to have product market fit.
That's great advice. Sue, or Derek, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. Oh, right here, since you're back.
Hey, great discussion. When you go to scale, maybe you could talk a little bit about the risk. I mean, you talked about a little bit, but not just the risk in terms of, we missed something in the reliability testing, but more like forecasting, like you mentioned. I used to work at Amazon, and my project was the Fire Phone. Okay, we all thought, oh my God, this is going to be huge. All right, but it didn't resonate with customers. My colleague, he was doing the Echo. All right, they had one assembly line. We set up 4, for the phone. So I'm not sure how we missed that, but maybe you could talk about the risk and how you balance that.
Sure, that's a really tough one. I think it's a little bit different with a company like Amazon, who's always shooting for the stars. But from a startup, small company point of view, you're always worried if you're going to undersell and not have enough product, but you're aware of what your budget is and what you can afford to have. So, I guess people forecasting correctly is when they're overly aggressive. So putting more effort into your market research and your market fit and your viability, and also like doing Kickstarter campaign can be good for that, to feel out, or Indiegogo or whatever your choice is, to feel out what the demand is and get product to the market. But ultimately there's no magic recipe for this. You don't know what's going to happen when your product gets out there. You don't know how many people are going to go for it. I'm sure someone has a better equation than me, but it's better to undershoot than overshoot and then put yourself out of business.
Yeah, there's one piece of that I disagree with. I very rarely recommend crowdfunding campaigns to people because I think people use it as an indicator of demand, and that's not always the case. It's a function of how much money you pump into advertising. But I think that when it comes to forecasting, my advice to people is like always be chasing the upside. So what I mean by that is like, I know you want to be optimistic, and I know you think that your product is the best thing since sliced bread, but like be measured in how much you forecast in the beginning, and like chasing down upside and trying to get more allocation of a particular IC. It's a good problem to have, and you can work that. That is a far better problem to have than having inventory sitting at a 3PL that you can't sell.
just to add to that, I think startups benefit from the fact that they have an easier time testing. Not like easier time testing, and I think in any sales channel you go into, there are different ways you can test. So like I definitely agree, like crowdfunding is not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, it's one way you can look at the market and get a little bit of feedback. Similarly in retail, like very rarely does a retailer say, hey, good news, we want 20,000 units, we're going to put you in all 2,000 stores nationwide. Usually you start online, maybe you go into a small 6-store test, maybe you roll out from there. There are ways to be thoughtful and careful so that a year from